you people on Google and YouTube that just are been broadcasting for a few minutes and I haven't. So I'll just start out and say, without repeating it, that this episode of Serial Dynasty, episode 23, with the interview with Jim Trainum, the theme that's running through it, I think, is forget what you know. And so according to Jim Trainum, and I think it's true, so many of the problems in these investigations come when the detectives and law enforcement in general think they know what happened and seek to confirm that. So I talked about Jim Trainum's background, which if you missed the first part of this, to anyone on YouTube streaming or Google Hangouts, it will be on my YouTube channel soon. And I'm Brendan Kenny. You can put that in. I think pretty easily find it if you put in Serial Brendan Kenny. I have that stuff as tags. Now, what Jim Trainum is totally solid on, and I always enjoy, just say always, I heard him on Serial, and I think I heard the original This American Life episode that I referenced. It's called, just I want you to see it so you can look it up if you want to hear more about him. Oh, it's called Kim Possible, and it's from episode 507, Confessions, dated October 11th, 2013. That's This American Life, and Sarah Koenig was at This American Life before. Okay, so what I was saying that Jim is what constitutes good evidence, and he reminded us all that this idea of how Adnan responded after Hayes' death, that people seem to put a lot of stock in, was really faulty because, one, people react differently to many things, and people see us in different situations depending on our relationship with them, and also memories can change based on knowing he was arrested and everything like that. So he totally discounts all this stuff about how Adnan responded, and that's always a good remark for Adnan. But for those of us who are really in the weeds on this case, looking at other people, and I'm going to talk a little tiny bit at the end about Don. So just a little foreshadowing there. So let's talk a little bit about how these investigations worked, because what this interview provided for me was a reminder of how police investigation work and some of the problems with them from the standpoint of getting at the facts and getting at the truth. One, and it's something that's always bothered me, even when I was on the side of law enforcement representing them in civil cases, was that part of the interrogation process and the MO of law enforcement, and I'm not saying anything out of school because many of them would tell you the same thing, is they're allowed to lie to people and say things that aren't true. And I saw that the first time when, and actually I'm trying to incorporate what been giving me. So thank you so much for your feedback. I'm trying to do it. So I'm trying to avoid the word really. I'm trying to avoid saying this thing is as much. And I'm also trying to avoid getting quite as deep on the weeds in some of my own personal cases because I think it's distracting, according to people. And I agree. So please, any feedback you have, direct my way. I try to follow it because you guys know a lot better than me how I'm doing. So the lies. Just in this one case where this person was terminated, I found out that the day that she was briefly interrogated, they made up what they called a ruse about why she was being called into the office. That it was a made up thing, and that bothered me. And I said, "What, you can just lie?" And the person said, "Yeah, that's what we do." Well, that's a problem, because if I could just if I'm in a deposition and I could ethically make up evidence and tell the witness it was true and hammer them with that as long as I wanted, in the case of the Jim Trainum case from This American Life, 5 hours, and hammer this person with 5 hours with false evidence, made up evidence that just, in the creative recesses of my imagination, boy, I could do a lot. So to me, there's a problem built in with that. So we have the lies, or whatever you want to call it, ruses that are used during the interrogations. The leading questions. you may have remembered an undisclosed, I think it was back in August, where they went through those other cases involving Detective Massey, Detective Ritz, and McGill. I always say the name wrong. The guy with a Scottish-Irish last name, with how he did things and how they would get the evidence that they wanted to the witness through the interrogation in many cases. So all the witness would need to make a false confession, and I'm not saying it was their intent to get the witness to make a false confession, was there. And so a lot of times you'll hear in these cases, or I certainly have, following true crime stuff, where the detective or someone will say, this person knew information that they could not possibly know because it wasn't public information. Well, sometimes it turns out that it was disclosed to them in one way, shape, or form during the interrogation. So 5 hours is a long time to do that. And if you're asking leading questions, you can do a lot of that. You can tell them a lot of what you want. And leading questions are interesting to me because actually I'm going to ask you, people on Periscope or however you could communicate with me anywhere, to just tell me on Periscope, it's through the hearts or whatever. How many of you people following are lawyers? Anyone? How do you just touch the screen for hearts? I'm not trying to get free hearts. I'm just sort of interested in my audience. Hearts do not mean that you love me. It's just a way of saying like or responding. I don't know why they use hearts. Okay. My experience has been most people who listen to these are not lawyers, which not that you as lawyers, but it would seem to me that lawyers would be more interested in some of these really important cases. And I found as a class of people, they're less so maybe than the general public. And maybe I'm wrong about this, or maybe people don't get really deep in the woods, but I think part of that is, as lawyers, our focus in many times is, to win, right? For our client, it's, let me make an analogy. I'm going to make an analogy what Jim Trainum was saying, is he said, a lot of times what could be a problem in interrogation or an investigation, if it becomes individual focused rather than evidence focused. We decide that Adnan's our man, and so then it's just how to get there rather than, well, let's find out what happened. And in my cases, I've seen the same thing. I've seen lawyers do that, where it seems like your curiosity is suppressed. You're not focusing on finding out all the facts and then working with the facts to help your client. You're just trying to get to the finish line, and that is a problem that plagues an investigation and can plague cases. And that's why, as some of you know, in a lawsuit in court, if I'm doing a direct examination, so let's just give an example, I'm asking questions of my client. So in my cases, they would be someone working for mostly a Fortune 500 company in a class action, mass tort, or product liability case. So I'm asking, let's say, a court representative questions. They have to be open-ended questions. They can't be leading questions, with some exceptions. Sometimes if you have a terrible witness, the judge might allow you to lead just to get the person to talk and get to where you need to do. So if you were the corporate representative, I couldn't say, now, your product's completely safe, correct? First of all, that's not how I ask cross-examination questions, but that's many times how they are. No, I would have to ask who, what, when, where, how, why type questions to come to that. What do you believe about your product? And they'd say, yeah, it's safe. Well, why? You don't have to ask questions that way, but they can't be leading. So you can't, a leading question is one in which the question itself suggests the answer. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons, is that we don't want to have a lawyer who's testifying, essentially, on direct examination. Fine to do that on cross-examination, but not on direct. Because this evidence is supposed to be not argument, but evidence, and it's supposed to come from the witness. So, and as a bigger matter, the difficulty with leading questions is that they don't illustrate facts and information that isn't already there. So question for me, why, when I'm cross-examining someone, right? When someone else's witness is in front of me and I'm trying to direct statements their way to get at facts I need to get at, why am I only using leading questions? Why will I never use an open-ended question. Well, the point of that witness for me is not to, figure out what happened, because we're already in the middle of trial, and we're just trying to establish facts that this witness can give me that will bolster my case, which is entirely appropriate, because we've had a whole however long to figure out who said what, where, when, how, why, and the other side has all the witnesses they can have. But when we're talking about an interrogation, we're in a totally different place. We're not in court. We're still gathering facts. And think about this for a moment. The police have a role that's different from everyone else's. They have the ability to have a police station, bring people in, have the badges, have the guns, search warrants. They can do all sorts of things that no one else can do. And so if they don't do their job properly, Adnan Syed can't come in later and pick up the pieces. He can't do a search of Jay's house. That's called breaking and entering. You'll get arrested for that. So if the cops don't do it, you're stuck. And that's lost so often in this. And I think taking Jim Trainum's interview and adding in all that we know about this case and just thinking more conceptually, it starts to paint a picture about the problem and what happened in this case. So in this form of interrogation that they used in this case, the detective does most of the talking. So that he or she is supplying the information, and the witness is in a position to accept or reject it. And every time they reject it, in a sense, they're punished. If they accept it, we move on. And that's what you do in cross-examination. But when you do that, there's a judge, there's a jury, there's all these safeguards built in that aren't in the interrogation. So that's just what strikes me as almost offensive about this approach, is it's totally inappropriate when you're in a one-sided affair like you are in an investigation as part of a police investigation. Let's talk about looking good on paper. And for that, I want to talk about good evidence. And some of you who followed my retrospective on Serial Season 1, which is on YouTube, plug, I talked about the quote about good evidence from Serial Season 1 and Sarah Koenig's reaction to what Jim Trainum said. And I'm going to play that again because I like it a ton. And it, again, tells us more about Jim Trainum and about how police officers look at this case. Give me a second. I'm almost there. Bad evidence. All right, here we go. We're taking a little time. It's slower than I anticipated, but it was the one part I'll say on Serial where when I heard it, I was talking back. It wasn't the only part, but I was talking back to the radio. I remember being in the car driving. I think it was snowing, and I was driving to work, stuck in traffic, and I was talking back to the radio, to Jim Trainum and Sarah Koenig. Here it is.
To push, how much do you want to create quote unquote bad evidence?
But like, there's no such thing. Like this is
an actual term. It's called bad evidence, right? You don't want to do something if it's going to go against your theory of the case.
But then I don't get that. I mean, that's like what my father used to always say: all facts are friendly. Like, shouldn't that be more true for a cop than for anyone else? Like, you can't pick and choose.
Rather than trying to get to the truth, what you're trying to do is build your case and make it the strongest case possible.
But how can it be a strong case, and how can he be a great witness if there's stuff that's not true or unexplained?
Indeed. And that's what we've been discovering in Undisclosed and Serial Dynasty. So that the mindset is you need to prove your case. And Jim Trainum even mentioned or said that in Baltimore, there were so many murder cases that you couldn't take the time you needed to. I really, See, I said really again. It's one of the things that, based on feedback, I'm trying to cut out saying so much. But Bob talked to him about his, very diplomatically, saying, well, why did they draw the line here? I understand that you have to draw the line somewhere. There has to be a part where you say this and no farther in terms of investigation. You know, you stop looking for Martians being involved in the murder or a one-armed man. you just stop it, and you have enough evidence to go forward. And Bob said, well, why on earth did they stop it here? And Jim Trainum noted that, well, they should have gone farther. And I will say that this is a really important point. The shoulda, coulda. In hindsight, it always looks like you could always do more. Okay, someone made some goofy comment. That you can always do more in a case to do a better job. And looking 15 years later, even the best case would have problems. And so that's why I appreciated that Jim Trainum gave some examples of what the police could have easily done to bolster their case or maybe weaken it. And that was have Jay call Adnan during one of the interviews, which happens all the time. Cases all the time do that. And someone asked what is on my ear. It's just a YouTube. It's not a YouTube, a Bluetooth. So. And also search Jay's house. And there's some talk about why they didn't want to do it. And here's the thing. Another thing I'm going to cut out with feedback. People say, well, I noticed, I say it all the time. Here's the problem. So let's get in the mind of the detectives. And we're assuming for the moment that we've got a detective that's not like Jim Trainum. So we have a detective that is not very conscientious. Last thing they'd ever dream of would be a false confession, you know, wouldn't cut corners. And if they found out they did it, they'd spend the rest of their life trying to fix the problem, which seems to be Jim Trainum. Now that person, okay, I was going somewhere and I lost it. Give me a second. What would that person do? My mind just escaped me. So I'm going to move on, and maybe I'll be able to go back and say what the problem was. Let's talk about looking good on paper, the investigation looking good on paper. And let's step back and get some context. The paper he's relying on is the police own documents. So these are the reports that they wrote about what happened. Now, in many cases, frankly, as Jim Trainum could tell you, even those are bad in many cases, where even those in their own notes show how things are going. Just like in many cases, the dashboard cameras or the camera that the police officer is carrying on themselves itself tells a bad story for the police officer. This isn't one of those cases. When you actually read the reports, yes, there are problems, but at least to me, there was nothing on first glance. If I knew nothing about the case, I'd say, whoa, this is terrible. And that's why Jim said what we had is we have these cell records that bring us to Jennifer, that bring us to Jay, that bring us to Adnan. Yes, that's what I'm saying. What I was going to say earlier is that if we don't have this conscientious police officer who's loath to get a false confession or loath to use unfair tactics to get and win a case, then there's ways that they can use the mode of the investigation, make sure it looks okay, and then have the substance manipulated. And that's what may have happened here, to put it diplomatically. We have, during the interrogation, it's practiced beforehand, off camera, or when they're changing tapes. And the detectives make certain that if there's a problem with the response, they try to solve it, or they get at their information in a way that seems honest. So when Bob was talking about Debbie's interrogation, we have, again, the tape that needs to be changed, even though it probably came at a time when it wouldn't have needed to be changed. So they were careful to have an above ground investigation that looked okay, as long as you don't get to the below ground investigation. Jim Trainum was looking at the above ground investigation, undisclosed in Serial Podcast, and to some degree Serial Dynasty Podcast, and to some degree Serial Podcast is getting to the underground. So conceptually imagine if we had a wrongful termination case and all we had to rely on was, let's say, the summary judgment papers of the employer. It might look very good for the termination of the employee if you don't have the other side. And a lot of times the other side is not in official sign on the dotted line documents. It's in drafts, it's in notes, it's in emails, it's in all sorts of different places. And if you don't reach down into that, you're not going to know what happened. And based on agreement on how he was looking at the case, that's not what Jim Trainum was doing. He was looking at the actual paperwork to help Sarah Koenig say, well, how does this case fall? What should be my attitude? What is the baseline? So he didn't see, and he wasn't able to look at it to find out about the tap. That was Susan Simpson's great contribution to showing that apparently there was a tapping going on during Jay's interview, which was indicating, referencing documents, all the stuff that wasn't being caught by the audio. So these police officers, if what we think is true about the case, are smart, the DA too, and they came up with a method of working up weak cases that disclose the weakness of cases in an obvious way without digging deep. And that's something to keep in mind, because there's certain things that as a lawyer at trial and cross-examination, an opening statement or a closing statement or direct examination, I can look at and I can pretty easily present to the jury that there's a problem. So if I have a videotape, especially where the witness is being kowtowed, he's being hammered, he's being lied to, and it's all in this nice little snippet, there's a lot I can do with that. But if there's stuff going on off camera, if there's these pre-interviews, if there's all these things out there that are problematic, and if I could present them to the jury in a way they could understand with competent evidence, it could prove my point. It's still very hard to do. And the type of stuff that the law enforcement were arguably doing in this case is just that sort of thing. It's hard to, in a really easy, visceral way, portray that to a jury. And it worked in this case, and I think in others. So that's the context of how this investigation went, I think. People don't like cops. Something Jim Trainum stated, and many of us know, they do like firefighters. And that's the difference between being a police officer and a firefighter in many ways. And that's the great contribution of Bob Ruff, I think, to the Adnan Syed case. He's an outsider and an outsider's insider and an insider's outsider. He's in investigation, arson investigation, and he is an expert witness, but he's not exactly law enforcement. And I think that's part of what's contributed to making Serial Dynasty so different, new, and allowing us to forget what we know. He did that with Don. He did that with many other people. He did that with Neighbor Boy, also known as E. And I think he's going to continue to do this as this goes on. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to play out with his new podcast, but that's going to happen as we go. Now, one of the feedback things that I get a little bit sidetracked with personal stories and stuff. So I do have notes here. Look these over and just make sure I didn't miss something I wanted to talk about. I'm going to talk about Don, and if people have questions in whatever way they can present questions, which I haven't figured out yet. I think I can, on this, I can initiate Q&A. I'm opening Q&A on the Google one. Oh, it says this feature is disabled. Well, so I don't know how you can do that. On Periscope, you can have questions. So if you have some, we can hit that. Yes. Oh, here we go. Oddness. Many people, including me, throughout the case, have had little problems, odd things that maybe I haven't been able to account for. Way back, I had a problem with the "I'm going to kill" letter. If you remember, this was one that was it Laura or Aisha and Adnan were writing back and forth in a health class, and the context is really weird. What exactly was involved, what they were talking about, whether it was Hay being pregnant or something. And at some part of it, it wrote "I'm going to kill," and Sarah, I think, blew it off, saying, well, this sounds too melodramatic. And I thought, well, maybe it sounds melodramatic, but it couldn't be true. We found out more as time went on that that it's very unlikely this had anything to do with Hay's murder, because it was written in November and Hay and Adnan got together again. It was in Adnan's book, one of his books, but it doesn't seem like it would be a trophy or anything like that when they did the search. So really a big nothing, but it's still weird. And there's weird things that happen in any case. And in a quick example, without getting too deep in the woods, is I had a case where there was a guy put in administrative segregation in a prison for having a substance underneath his bunk that was white powder in a baggie taped under there, and on a presumptive drug test came positive, I think, for cocaine. The guy said it was sugar. It actually was sugar. The guy had sugar taped up under his bunk, according to him, because he worked in the kitchen and one of the guards liked to take his sugar because he said he had too much. That was the truth, as far as I know. That's what happened. Very weird, but sometimes weird things are true. And sometimes the facts are weird and they seem very uncircumstantial because they're manipulated. And to take that, I'm going to lay down, what was said at the end of Serial about what are the chances. And I'll talk about Dawn. All right? So what are the chances?
Dana's right to be skeptical. What are the chances one guy got so unlucky that everything lined up against him just so?
Oh, yeah. I thought it was a longer clip. Well, if everything lined up against him just so because it was set up that way, then it's not lucky. Okay. Someone says I'm listening to old things. Well, all right. Anyway, comments. I like feedback. Ask for feedback. So I'm getting feedback. Right. Don. Right. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? All right, Dawn. My thought about Dawn. We're finding a lot of interesting things about Dawn. And if you remember, like I remember, the jury was very interested in why Jay. How did Jay come into this case? Why did Adnan call Jay? Or that was a big part of the prosecutor's case. Why not one of his mosque friends? Why this guy that he doesn't seem to even be friends with? All right, someone's just being obnoxious. All right. So why Jay? And the idea was that the prosecution came up with, well, Jay, because he was the kind of guy that you could pull into something like that, and Adnan could hold over his drug dealing over him. And that's how he got Jay to help, because disposing of the body was a two-man job. All right. Disposing of the body was a two-man job. And as far as I know, everything we know about the crime scene and whether Hay's body was buried or put there or when it happened, I think any way you slice it, it's a two-man job. If I'm not pointing any fingers at Dawn or saying who it is, but if it's Dawn, who's the second man? And there's no indication of who that would be. If the Dawn that we've learned about, the Dawn that we've been told about through Bob, isn't the one we thought was. It was a emo type guy who kind of kept to himself, did his own thing, didn't really stay close to anyone in The beta male. I'm being called a beta male. Well, I guess I never was very good at sports. Where was I going before someone commented? With feedback I asked for. Yes. So who would Don have to help him with the body if it's a two-man job? And who'd be his wingman? And so that, I think, is a really important question. You know, looking at human psychology in a case, and that's one, you know, that needs to be looked at. Anyway, if some of you are watching some of these comments, they're hilarious. It sounds like it's a Periscope bot. Why am I wearing a tie late at night? I'm still dressed up from church. So anyway, so that, we've got a guilter. He says Adnan did it. So the beta male comments that someone's making on Periscope and other things have to do that he thinks Adnan did it. So this is my first time on Periscope on any video, really, where I've got someone who's coming from the guilt side who's commented. So this is like a moment for me. I'm starting to experience what a lot of you other people on Reddit and everyone has. So this is something that I'm kind of enjoying. All right, so this guy thinks Adnan's guilty. So, all right, I guess it's so. He said it. Whoever said that. So that's really all I have. I tried to. You can block on Periscope. Someone said, well, I guess I'll figure that out and block him. So, all right. That's all I've got. This will be on YouTube. So if you couldn't catch all or part of it or want to share it or somehow are a glutton for punishment and want to listen to it again, you can find it there. Have a great night, everybody. And hope you're looking as forward to the next episode of Undisclosed as I am.